we're going to talk about the ethics of AI in defense. So it's not about robotics, it's not about AI, the accent is on ethics and defense. What I want you to do is to take this time to tell you a little bit about what is ethics of AI, but also focusing on a specific case study, which I think you might all find very relevant, which is defense. So I'm going to start by giving you a definition of artificial intelligence. Not that you don't know what AI is, but when it comes to ethics of AI, there are a lot of angles from where you can look at this problem. And I want to make clear what is the, so to speak, angle, but also the level of abstraction at which I'm looking at AI. And also focus on digital war. And then I'll address three questions which actually mirror three phases of AI ethics as a discipline. Why? What? So why do we need an ethics of AI? What does an ethics of AI look like? And how do you do an ethics of AI? And by then, if I haven't bothered you too much, we'll leave you with a message. So let me just make a premise here. I'm going to talk about ethics of AI in defense. We come to a debate on ethics of AI from months of discussion on ChatGPT, whether AI is going to become sentient, aware of itself, creative. When you factor this into the context of defense, there is a lot of debate about machine becoming killer, overtaking human mind, humankind, and killing us all or enslaving us all. This is all sci-fi, and this is not the focus of this talk. That's not about sci-fi. We're going to talk about specific, concrete, ethical questions that concern the use of AI in defense. Everything else I regarded as interesting on a Friday night sci-fi reading club, not for research. What we're going to talk about? We're going to talk about AI understood in this way. As you all know, AI is a cluster of technologies. There is not just one AI. It can be developed in different ways. But from an ethical point of view, when we look at AI, we're looking at a growing resource of interactive, autonomous, and self-learning agency, which can be used to perform tasks that would otherwise require human intelligence to be executed successfully. Now, there are two parts to this definition. The second one comes straight from Turing. It's about a technology that does what we do in a different way, with no intelligence. That's actually where the convenience of using AI emerges from. It does it in a much easier or simpler way than we would do it from a cognitive point of view. The first part identifies the four elements from where all the ethical potential and the ethical risks emerge. It's an interactive, autonomous self-learning technology, which is a form of agency. It's not a tool, it's an agent. So these are the four characteristics you need to keep in mind whenever you think about the ethics of AI. So having said this, when we talk about AI in defense, the focus has been for the past 12 years since the US directive on automation in defense, the focus has been on autonomous weapon systems. And that's correct, because the autonomous weapon systems are one form of use of AI in defense. But what we have learned in the past 2 years, since the start of the war in Ukraine, is that AI can be used across the scope of defense operations. So this is a picture of, to remind you of Clearview AI. This is a US company which used AI to face recognition. Now, this technology is very problematic when we use it in civilian context, but we've used it during the war in Ukraine to identify Russian soldiers who had been captured, wounded, or killed, to inform their families, so to trying to breach the propaganda, the Russian propaganda within Russia itself. So when we think about the use of AI in defense, we should really keep in mind that ethical questions are about current and foreseeable uses of AI across the scope of defense operation. What does that mean? Well, it means that when we think about defense, you can categorize defense operations across three categories: sustainment and support, adversarial and non-kinetic uses, and adversarial and kinetic uses. All three categories, they now rely on AI. This is why we talk about digital warfare these days, because it's all enabled by digital technologies. So we use AI for back office operation, for logistics, and also for AI for intelligence. If you ever heard of OSINT, this open source intelligence, is the collection, massive collection of data, publicly available data, which is only useful for intelligence analysis because AI can tap into it and extract information. Another example is still in Ukraine. They are using AI to identify landmines into the territory, and the plan is to free the country of landmines in 10 years. Without AI, it would have taken 757 years. Then you have adversarial and non-kinetic uses. These are what we would call cyber. You must have heard of cyber attacks, cyber warfare. AI can play a key role in that as well, both because we can use AI to engineer system responses, so countering attack, to develop attack, and to develop malware, so software which can actually harm other systems. And then we have adversarial and kinetic uses. These are lethal autonomous weapon systems, the use of AI for tactical decision. The misuse of AI on Gaza by Israel is an example of this, and also AI to support military personnel in combat, trying to understand who's fit for battle during the time of war. Now, each of these three categories poses ethical questions, ethical challenges. If you think about AI for sustainment and support, you have questions which are not, or challenges which are not different from what you hear when you're using AI for healthcare or for research. It's about identifying the right level of trust between the human and the machine. It's about making sure that you can have accountability sorted. It's about making sure that the technology is robust in a technical way, so it's not fragile to malicious input. It's about transparency, and it's about the respect of human rights. Now, the difference when it comes to defense is that on top of these issues, you have other issues that emerge as you move from the, let's say, office-based to the adversarial activities. So on top of these issues, when we move on to the cyber domain, we have ethical challenges which have to do with control of AI, and so, for example, the risks of escalation, and the assurance that we can get that we can use AI in respect of the principles of just war theory. Just war theory is the ethical theory that supports or underpins international humanitarian laws. When it comes to adversarial and kinetic uses, so weapons, all these first two categories of issues, they are still there, but you also have pressing questions concerning moral responsibility, respect of human dignity, and the respect of just war theory principles of distinction and necessity. If you look at them all together, this gives you a systematic view of the ethical challenges that we have to face when we try to use AI in defense. Now, from now on, whatever I'm going to tell you is part of a research project which has been funded by the MOD, the Ministry of Defense in the UK, and the project has been lasting 5 years precisely to build this systemic view and a systematic solution for the ethics of AI in defense. When I started working in this area, I will take this slide as the answer to the question, why do we need an ethics of AI? We need an ethics of AI because we need to address all these ethical challenges. These are the problems that we face. This is where we should be going forward. But then I understood, as I presented this talk over the years to different audiences, that the why question is actually a whether question. It's not a what for we need an ethics of AI, but it's, do we need an ethics of AI in defense at all? Is that the right thing to do? Now, this question is asked by two camps of people. On the one side, you have the pacifists. The pacifists will tell you war is the ultimate evil. Ethics of war should not be there, because whenever there is an ethics of war, you're justifying war, and so you're justifying evil. So there should not be any ethics of AI in defense, because there should be no use of AI in defense, as there should be no defense, no war at all. I disagree with this view, because I believe that there are some wars which are justified, and those are the self-defense war. I come from a country, Italy. We liberated ourselves from Nazi fascists because we went into self-defense mode. So I would be denying my history if I didn't believe that. If there are justifiable war, then there are justifiable uses of technologies, particularly AI in defense. So it's our duty, I believe, to understand what are the boundaries within which we want to use these technologies. The opposite camp is the defense folks, the establishment, who tell you, well, why do we need to bother with AI and ethics when our opponents are already using AI? And while they use AI, we stop ourselves, we restrain ourselves thinking about ethical questions, so we lose time, we might put ourselves in a situation where we have boundaries, whereas the opponent doesn't have those boundaries, so they will get the upper end. I believe this view is equally wrong, because it lets the opponent set the level at which we respect the principles of our societies. If we're going to use AI breaching the values of human rights, breaching the principles of just war theory, as liberal democracies, we have already lost. There is no point in defending ourselves because we're already doing what the opponents do. So this is why we need an ethics of AI, the answer to the whether question. And in a more precise way, I take ethics of AI in defense, but all over in other domains, to be not just a way of setting boundaries. I'll tell you about this a bit more. Ethics is a conceptual analysis to identify the strategy so that we can walk between the risks and the opportunities. The three words here are conceptual, risk, and opportunity. AI changes the world and changes the way in which we do things in the world and changes the way in which we think about the world. At the beginning of this talk, I told you we're talking about a new technology which is a form of agency. That's quite new and quite radical in terms of conceptual thinking. These changes need to be understood so that we can understand what are the risks and what are the opportunities. And the ethical analysis is there to tell us how to navigate this space. So it's not just about forbidding, it's also about enabling and steering. That's why I take ethics to be so important in defense. And I want to give you an example so that you don't take the word of a philosopher for it. And I'm going to focus on the use of AI for cyber and cyber warfare. This is something that we've been grappling with for quite a few decades now. Some of you might remember the cyber attacks of Russia against Estonia, 2007. Or you might have heard of it. It's where it all started. Since then, cyber attacks have become very common. We all know about them. And they have been they provide me with a very good example of how the lack of ethical consideration has brought us in a very dangerous situation these days. So just to give you a sense, I mentioned AI changes the way about which we think about reality and the world around us. It's true also for digital technologies more broadly. So bear with me for a second. This is a fortress. Now, a fortress is a classical way of representing defense. A fortress does two things. It keeps secure the people inside and fences off attacks coming from the outside. It's two tasks. If you take this analogy or this idea to the cyber, when we think about cyber threat, defense and security go different ways. Security is becoming a way of engineering systems so that they are robust. Defense has become a way of fencing against attacks, of defending forward, the US will say. So we're separating these two things. And why is it that? Well, because in cyberspace, non-kinetic cyber attacks, so those attacks that do not cause any physical damage, they cost much less than kinetic attacks. They are quite likely to be successful because if there is a system online, sooner or later it will be hacked. And attribution is problematic, so it's not certain that you will be identified as the attacker once you launch an attack. This makes cyberspace what Harknett in the US defines an offense-persistent environment. So it's an environment where it's very convenient to attack more than to defend. Because if you keep attacking, at some point you will be successful. These two elements make cyberspace a weaponized space. It's a space where everybody acquires offending capabilities more than defending capabilities, because this way you are on the upper hand side. This creates a vicious circle where state actors are the key elements. State actors are the ones who run more cyber attacks against each other. I'm going to go back to AI in a moment, but this will make sense in a few minutes. Bear with me. So much so that in the past few years, countries like the US, Russia, the UK, the US, Russia, Israel, and NATO, they started building, officially, offensive capability in cyberspace. In the US, we have a national cyber force, which does offensive cyber. NATO has a treaty that since 2016 allows its member to respond to cyber attacks in an offensive way. AI plays a key role in this dynamic. It makes this circle spin much faster. Not only because we can use AI to create new cyber weapons and so to run new attacks, but also because we are embedding these technologies in our infrastructure with little attention to the fact that it's a very fragile technologies. It takes very little to hack an AI systems. You know this much better than I do, but data poisoning, small percentage of wrong data can make the system behave in a wildly different way. Tampering or categorization models, backdoors, prompt injection, if you are familiar with LLMs, takes one sentence in natural language to get an LLM to do completely different things. So attacks on AI, they change from attacks on other digital systems before, because they are not about disrupting the system. They are about making the system do different things. It's about controlling the system. So we have this circle where attack is easier, more convenient than defending. So everybody tries to attack. AI enables this dynamic. And this creates what is called a stability dilemma. So to keep things stable, everybody attacks more than defending. And at some point, something might go wrong. There might be an escalation. Things might go the wrong way. Why is this relevant when we think about AI and ethics and defense? Well, because we got here, because about 12 years ago, what we decided to do was not to think about the ethics of cyber warfare, the ethics of cyber attacks. What does it mean to wage a war in a cyber? We thought that we wanted to keep it under-regulated. We dodged the ethics bullet, so to speak, by saying, and this is what the Tallinn manual did, well, we only need analogies to understand when cyber attacks are equal to kinetic attacks, so the battlefield attack, and we only need to regulate those. The rest is espionage. It was the wrong way of thinking, because fast forward 12 years later, what we're missing is a strategy to identify risks, opportunities, to foster coordination and accountability. We haven't defined what is a legitimate cyber attack target in the context of cyber attacks. We don't have red lines for out of proportion attacks. We don't have metrics to assess the impact of an attack. So we created a huge, very adversarial dynamic without regulating it, because we decided, it's not that we didn't see it, we decided, and when I say we, I'm being generous towards the field, I say they decided, and some of us were telling them that it was wrong, not to consider the conceptual analysis needed to understand this new form of warfare, and then understand how to regulate it. Now that we have AI embedded 360 degrees into defense, I really hope that we learn the lesson and we can move forward and try to understand what are the risks and opportunities on which we have to focus. So this is why we need an ethics of AI. Now, what does an ethics of AI look like in modern days? The defense establishment came to AI ethics a little bit later than other contexts. The first document, the US DIB, Defense Innovation Board document, is from 2020 or 21. And the debate on AI, ethics of AI, had already grown quite a bit by then. But that's not a bad news, because at least they could learn from whatever was already there before. And what was there before is something like this. This is a map from the Berkman Center in 2020 that shows you a number of set of ethical principles that had been published by then. I think a review paper published in Nature the year after this, 2021, counted 87 set of ethical principles being published by different organizations. And you see that there are themes which are recurring in this privacy, accountability, human rights. They are there. All the documents, they mention this kind of topics. And actually, you will see that they will recur also into the AI ethics in defense area. So what is AI ethics doing, actually? If you were to cluster research in this area, you will say that it focuses a lot on 5 specific ethical risks. They go from AI enabling human wrongdoing. You all know about bias and undue discrimination. AI reducing human control. As long as AI remains a black box and we cannot explain, given an input, how the output is determined, it is something that we control not as much as we should or we would when we use it in high risk domain, not to mention the fact that AI is a technology with limited predictability. There is an issue concerning human responsibility. It's very hard to attribute the responsibility for the actions on these machines back to the humans, as the design and development chain is very distributed, sometimes fragmented. There is an issue of devaluing human skills. There is a lot of debate about AI taking away jobs from human. I'm very skeptical about those estimates, because modeling and predicting the job market is very complex and it's very hard to understand, identify all the externalities ahead of time. My concern, and the concern there, should be much more about what skills are we going to lose if we delegate systematically the performance of some tasks to machine. Put it another way, we want pilots to still be able to land a plane, even if it's a machine who does it 99.5% of the time, because otherwise we won't be able to intervene when something goes wrong. We won't be able to tell when the machine is doing something wrong. And then lastly, the erosion of self-determination. We use AI to make decisions. Imagine a world where AI makes decisions which are professional, so in your office, and then in your private life. Watch this movie because you watched this other movie yesterday. Read this book, go to this place for holiday, meet this kind of people. At some point, this might start eroding our ability to make choices as humans. So this is also another ethical challenge. And then you have issues concerning security, lack of control, and escalation of responses. So the defense establishment came to this domain a few years ago, and they started to publish ethical principles for AI. At the moment, there are 3 sets of ethical principles, the US, the UK, and NATO. Some of these principles are, to me, quite redundant. When I read the US one, the 5th one says governable. And the question in the mind of a philosopher was like, what do you mean? That before this principle it was not governable? There is an option, it's not governable? And so like with the UK, human centricity, or NATO, lawfulness. There is a redundancy there. But you can also see that in these principles there is a strong consistency among the 3 principles, but also with the theme I just mentioned. So they are about responsibility, they are about equitability, they are about transparency, about bias. So they really built on the ethics debate. But there are 2 main limitations in this set of principles. I'm going to stop in a moment and I'm going to ask, do you think, having read this list, that there is something missing here? Keeping in mind that these are ethical principles for AI in defense. There is one word which is not there, and it's very problematic. Trust? Okay. One more, and then I'll resume. It's not trust. And it's not privacy. Give me one more, because otherwise it's embarrassing. So please, somebody say one more. Safety. Dignity as well. Okay, almost. I'll give you what the word is. It's justice. So there are 2 limitations. One is, with one I agree, the other one I'm not in agreement with. The first one is focus. So these principles, the one I'm going to show them again, they're all about the buzzword in the AI ethics domain, but they do not focus on the real ethical questions that you have when you apply AI to the defense domain. We're using AI to deliver coercive behavior. This coercive behavior is cyber, so sometimes it's not applied to coupled with force, or coupled to force. This is the key part of the problem. It's not possible to have ethical principles in AI. They're all about many, many things, and not the one thing that we are really concerned about, the application of force or the delivery of coercive behavior. Now, this is not random. This is the principle just to give you a sense that the word just is not there. So the DIB, this is the Defense Innovation Board in the US, which produced the US principles. And they are quite transparent about the fact that they avoided on purpose the use of the word justice. They say the principle, which in their list is the principle of traceability, stems from the DoD mantra that fights should not be fair, as DoD aims to create the conditions to maintain an unfair advantage over any potential adversaries, thereby increasing the likelihood of deterring conflicts from the outset. Fine, nobody thinks that war should not be about getting the upper end. The point is that we have a concept of justice in war, which tells you which are the acceptable way in which you can do that. So missing the word justice from this word is very problematic, because we are conflating the idea of fairness to the idea of justice, and that's not correct in a defense domain. So this is very, very problematic. And indeed, we mentioned at the very beginning that the challenges that we have when we think about adversarial uses of AI in defense, they center on the issues of just war theory, the theory that tells you what's just and unjust in war, the principles of preemption, prevention, proportionality, distinction, and necessity. When we talk about the misuse of AI in Israel to Gaza, it's about the breaching of the principles of distinction, necessity, and proportionality. So there is no AI ethics in defense if you take away just war theory, because we you take away the benchmark, so to speak. So part of the work that I've been doing in Oxford with my colleagues and researchers is actually this. Develop a framework to address the challenges of AI for coercion that will be consistent with the principles of just war theory. I won't bother you with this, but it's just to tell you what I'm doing these days. This requires two things. A philosophical theory, which closes the ontological gap between an idea of war, which is only physic and kinetic, with an idea of war which includes also something virtual, as in the cyber domain. A theory of value, so something that tells you what are the trade-offs, the things that, what's good and bad, so to speak. And then a risk assessment, which I think is the crucial way towards the regulation of autonomous weapon systems. So this is the one limitation. The other limitation, it's about the level of these principles. This is a critics that has been proposed a lot, not only for the AI ethics principles, but also for 3 minutes and I'll be done, for all the AI ethics principles in general. So the idea is that these principles, when you read AI has to be human-centric, has to be traceable, has to be equitable, they seem very nice. They are very nice buzzwords, but they don't provide any guidance. What does an engineer have to do when they read that AI has to be human-centric? What does that mean in concrete? So some have criticized those principles for being too generic, too high level. I think the critics is misplaced because those principles are like constitutional principles. They are not there to give you specific guidance. They are there to give you a direction. Those principles work like a compass, not a map. They tell you where we should be going, not how we get there. The next step is to draw the map, is to implement those principles, translate those principles to the practices. And I'm going to end in a few minutes. How do we do that? How do we draw the map? The first word, the first part of this part of this talk is about being cautious. Have you ever seen this type of map, or are you familiar with the expression gerrymandering? So gerrymandering is a way of, this is a map of the Massachusetts state in 1812. And it's a map that was designed by the then governor of the state to reshape the boundaries of the electoral district so that it would support or give an unfair advantage to the then coalition of Republican Democratic. It's called the gerrymandering because it looks like a salamander. And the guy then was called, his name was Gary. So the idea is that drawing a map is a normative act. A map is not a description, it's also like a way of making a decision over a specific territory. So when we say that we have to draw the map, that we have to implement principles into specific contexts, we should be mindful of the fact that that step from ethical principles to practices or ethical principles to tool is normatively loaded. There are these days a lot of standards, tool, guidelines to implement principles into practices. But those tools, standards, and guidelines, they are developed without thinking about the normative implications. There is a lot of, especially in Europe after the AI Act, there is a lot of buzz about auditing of AI, on conformity assessment of AI. You can audit AI using qualitative or quantitative metrics. Depending on which metrics you choose, you audit different parts of the system. So the choice of the metrics is actually very normative in terms of what are you going to assess. This translation requires a balancing of the principles among each other. The balancing means a different trade-off among different values. So this balancing requires the involvement of stakeholders, especially when we think about high-risk domain like defense. It shouldn't be an officer within the MOD who decides whether human centricity comes second or first with respect to transparency. It's something that requires balancing of the different interests. So there has to be somebody representing those interests. So this translation is actually an interpretation, which is a different thing. It's a way of posing an accent on different aspects. And it should not be done internally, because what we risk is either ethics devolution or ethics lobbying. So ethics devolution is where an institution, like a Ministry of Defense, says, well, this is a unit. You guys from tomorrow are in charge of translating the principles into practices, offloading the responsibilities for these normative decisions to people who have not the representativeness power, not the expertise to do that. And lobbying is when an organization will tell you, well, we have ethical principles, we have ethical practices, we don't need any regulation for the use of AI in our domain. And by the way, there is no regulation for the use of AI in defense in the world, not the least in Europe, because the AI Act does not focus on it. So what we need is a methodology, and the methodology should have 3 elements. It should include a multi-stakeholder body, so that we can ensure a moral impartiality of the debate. Ideally, they should reach solutions that are acceptable by all the people representing an interest in the game. The methodology should be reproducible and scrutable, so that we can hold people accountable, and should be transparent, so the criteria with which they make decisions should also be stated, so that if something goes wrong, we can go back and not only attribute responsibility, but also fix it, improve it. And I'm done. I'll leave you with this message. When I started studying this area, cyber warfare, was 2009. The first book I read was Clausewitz on war. And in one of the first chapters, he says, war, more than anything, is a social activity. Now, Clausewitz meant it in a specific way, but that sentence stayed with me, because I think it's true. And I think that there is a relation of mutual influence between societies and war. We use the technology, the science that we develop in our societies to support war, but also the way in which we use those technologies, the way in which or the extent to which we are happy to go far in reaching or supporting our values in war is a reflection of how deeply rooted those values are in our societies. If you think that this is true, then it makes sense that ethics is crucial when we think about digital warfare, because digital warfare is what societies like ours, digital societies, do. So we have to make sure that we fight ethical digital warfare, because otherwise we will have to admit that all the values that we respect so much in all the other domains are not so strongly rooted in our societies. So this is an element, and ethics of AI in defense is a key element to make sure that when we design and develop post-digital societies, so societies of tomorrow where digital technologies will not be anymore on the far front but on the background, they will be democratic, pluralistic, and just. And with this, I'll thank you.
Okay, thank you for a talk. If anybody has a question to our speaker, you're welcome to ask.
Thanks for your talk. I wanted to, if you could comment a little more on the aspects of offloading of responsibility to AI systems for decision making, and what role does that play in the ethical question? So saying, you know, this is the machine decided on this, so it's nobody's fault in a sense.
Yeah, it's there are 2 sides to that. One side is the, I think, ethical reasoning about involving machines into decision-making processes should be, again, strategic in the sense of understanding early what decision we want to delegate and what decision we don't want to delegate. And there should be also like an approach defined ex ante about how far we can disagree with machines. So suppose that machines tell you, you do X, and the officer with 20 years experience knows that X is wrong. Is there a space, a policy space or a situation where the officer can reasonably disagree without paying too many consequences afterwards? In terms of the responsibility being the machine being morally responsible, that's not acceptable. Moral responsibility requires an understanding of the situation, an understanding of the consequences. So it's only human who can be morally responsible. I've written that in some contexts, so short of using lethal force, it is feasible and it's possible to argue that people could take a moral gambit. And so you could say, well, I'll take the responsibility of using this technology, whatever happens, even if I don't have full control of the technology. But it's only in context when the use of AI does not imply for sure lethal consequences, because it's not ethical to play gambit with other people's life. So I'm not sure whether that answers your question, but yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for the talk. It was extremely interesting. So my question is more linked to risk assessment, actually. So AI is something that is at technology, I mean, but AI means everything and nothing at the same time. It means it's a lot of different strategies wrapped up in one umbrella term, actually. So how do you actually assess risks of such technologies? Because they're so different and everything goes so fast. And for the little that I know of it, lawmaking is kind of a slow process. And so how do you keep up with it?
So, good point. I think that the risk assessment is not something you do once and for all. And you have to have very, let's say, sophisticated model. For example, the AI Act has a very trivial model. I don't think that will work. We published a paper a few years ago with colleagues in Yale and Bologna where we proposed a different risk assessment model, which is much more similar to climate change risk assessment. But to me, the key part is not so much about the risk assessment model in itself, which could change. What is missing are the risk threshold, which are a normative decision. You know, you might assess that the technology might be more or less risky, but that means nothing if you don't have a standard for risk that tells you whether the risk is too much or too little. So we are missing both the technical, so to speak, tool, and the model, but we're also missing the public discussion about what risks we think are acceptable for AI in the defense domain. That's completely not there. And so it's, let's say, a bigger problem than just the model itself.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much for this talk. It's really important issues that you're bringing up. So my first question is, when you reviewed the regulation that are being put forward in the US, UK, and in Europe at large, I was wondering, what about Asia, which makes up a large fraction of the world? So where are they there?
So there is much, so I'm not an expert, but we did study on China and AI, and so they have some ethical principles, but they are very generic, and I'm not aware of any process for implementing those principles into practices into their own domain. This might be for my own ignorance or because there is no, let's say, public information about it, so I might be wrong, but that's what we have. We know, however, from the 2016 plan for China becoming a world leader in AI, that they've been developing AI for the past few years with the different methodologies that we have done in Europe. So they use a fusion methodology. So civilian uses and defense uses, they are developed at the same time, mostly by the same people. So it's quite likely that there might be some spillover, both in terms of capabilities and ethical thinking. They have ethical thinking and standards for civilian uses of AI, but there is not much in the public, at least, that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. Like many of us, I sat on those various meetings at the United Nations about lethal weapon. And one thing that struck me when they are designing new guidelines is that they still want the human to be in the decisional power. But in reality, the human is not so much in a position to take completely unbiased decision. Simple example, drones fly so fast and they send data at a rate which is very slow compared to the speed at which they are traveling. And they often send data that are already labeled. And the way that they're labeled is through AI. And so basically the decision comes down, and I'm not going to cite any country, but we know that some of the decisions were based on what the AI system had proposed to the human, and not on the actual human being able, having the time and the speed and the granularity of the video to be able to take a completely open decision. And this, to me, is the major issue. I think people don't realize, those lawmakers, that the issue is before the decision, is the information that is provided to the person to take a decision.
Yeah, no, indeed. The question of control of AI is a question that it's not addressed yet in a satisfactory way. We have buzzwords, we have categories, but nothing is there. And it changes with the type of deployment and the type of AI, the way you might want to control it and what you can get there. So indeed, I agree with you. There is no issue there. There is also another problem, because to the aspect of control, there is another phase to it, which is that not only the technology is not really controlled and the humans are not really put in a situation of controlling, but it's also bad for the officer put in their situation, because sometimes they need to witness something that is wrong, and there is no policy space, so to speak, for them to do something different. So it's a 360-degree problem. It's not just a let's say, adversarial problem. So it's lacking completely the solution. And I don't have one yet, I'm afraid. So.
Let's thank Professor Tadeu for her talk.